Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker, Robert McDonald, who is newly appointed Dean of the University Libraries of Colorado at Boulder. He's going to be talking about hybrid IT alignment for campuses, clouds, and the community. So, Robert, we can see your slides. Thank you for pulling them up, and you should be set to go.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Todd?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm glad you could see it because I've got a two-screen setup, and it's sometimes hard to tell where the slides are going to pop up the way Mark and Theta had that going too. I just wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm glad you could join us, and I really think this is a very pertinent topic. It's a lot of great speakers today, and looking at this, library and central IT relationship and collaboration, I think is really key for the next, I would say 5 years that we know of and 10 years that we don't know of for higher ed in particular, especially higher ed and the research libraries that support them. And as Todd mentioned, currently I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of Colorado Boulder. I've been here about 3.5 weeks. Prior to that, I was the Associate Dean for Research and Technology Strategy at Indiana University. And so even between these two use cases, it's an interesting set of models for IT. At IU, we had an 8-system campus, so there were a lot of familiarities with what Mark and Theta were talking about in terms of the different size campuses, the different needs of the campus, and what we had to support both from a library standpoint as well as from an enterprise IT standpoint. And in that particular case, they've got a long 20-plus year history at IU of working directly with enterprise technology in the libraries. So there's actually an enterprise technology team embedded in central IT in their business systems area that report back to the libraries and do lots of different work. And a lot of that was about economies of scale, supporting the system, libraries across all 8 campuses and so forth. Here at Boulder, we have a 4 campus system, but most of the IT is pretty distributed by campus. So when I talk about solutions and use cases here at the Boulder campus, it really is about the Boulder campus mostly. There's a medical campus in Denver, a metro campus in Denver, and another campus of the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. So with that, I'm going to move on into my slides here. And I wanted to bring up first just a little bit about the strengths that libraries bring to these IT library collaborations. The big piece for a lot of research libraries is the fact that we actually have faculty or research appointed lecturers that are librarians a lot of times. Here at Boulder, we have faculty status, and that's a key component because those connections with faculty and the connections with the research departments really lead to a level of trust around a lot of things, not just IT. We're talking about IT today, but a lot of that is, in terms of the library space, it's a great place for faculty to go find out about how they can connect with different areas of technology, both for their research needs, their teaching and learning needs, and so forth. Libraries are also pretty heavily concerned with preservation, and now that runs the gamut between the print world and the digital world. We also are pretty good at building communities, and that's really key in terms of how those communities are driven and making sure that we include the right partners. And I would say beyond IT, and IT is really important in a lot of what libraries do now, especially central IT services. And I was glad that Mark and Theta brought up single sign-on and kind of single campus or system strategies for federated authentication and access, because that's really one of the key pieces that almost all library apps are driven by and through for how we reach our users. And so that's one we could probably spend the whole day on, and I'm sure NISO has in other contexts, but it's a key collaborative component and community-driven component for libraries. We've got our metadata pieces, our descriptive components that are key. Our policies around access and advocacy are also key, and that whole package there, especially when you combine it with the connections that libraries have with the research faculty and schools, departments, and colleges on their campuses, that really is a great leverage point to work with IT, as well as what I would say is usually the faculty affairs area for the provost office on a campus, as well as for the research office that's on anyone's campus, because we're starting to see these synergies of various types of services that we need to support, whether they're current research information systems that may run the gamut between IT, libraries, and faculty affairs, or new areas being driven both at the campus, state, and federal level around open educational resources. Because as you start looking at those kinds of items, what you get is, and now I'm going to the next slide, is a view above campus. You're looking at basically the pressure points that are starting to reflect back, whether they're coming from the state or the federal level, or from the campus level. You have various initiatives that are going to come back and need the support of the major groups that I just talked about, from the libraries, the academic side, of the provost side, the IT side, the research side, and then depending on how your budgets are structured, and it was great to see that from Mark and Theta, you know, the resource constraints, not only of people, but also of just financial resources that are needed, both for the infrastructure investment that could be there, as well as for the people investment, because that's usually the more expensive component, both in library services as well as IT services, is the people side of things. I put this in here above campus because I wanted to bring up an older article. It's now almost 10 years old, but it reflects a lot of what I believe in working with IT, and it's called Above Campus Services, Shaping the Promise of Cloud Computing for Higher Education. And the authors are Brad Wheeler, who is the CIO at Indiana University, and Shel Wagner, who works for Internet 2 now, but had previously been the CIO at UC Berkeley. And the key to this article is it's at the early stages of what I now kind of term the cloud revolution. And we've seen a good chunk of this come true in the last 10 years that they kind of laid out here. But the real piece that I see for libraries in this, and looking above campus, is in partnering with IT to find the right levels of consortiums that can do the things that libraries are looking to do well, and at a good cost, using some of this new infrastructure that we can find in the cloud. And a key piece of this article, and this is an open source article you can find from EDUCAUSE Review online if you just look up the title that I gave you, and I can put the link into the chat. But they talk about consortium or community sourcing, and knowing when to go above your campus to build a federation. And that's really key for a lot of the services that I see libraries kind of moving to in the next few years. But what's really important to that, and looking above your campus and looking at the right types of partners and the right fit partners so that you can build those kinds of initiatives, is really in the leadership. And if I've worked in a lot of different universities, as well as working in consultation roles with a lot of different libraries. And if you're not talking with your central IT service provider on a regular basis, or vice versa, depending on how you're structured, or if you're a smaller place and it's all together, you need to enable those regular discussions. There needs to be a regular agenda, both with your groups that are doing the hands-on work, so like at your IT director or associate university librarian or associate dean level, as well as at your director levels. And that needs to happen, monthly is good. You might be meeting more regularly if you're in active projects with each other, but then also at the highest levels of leadership, both for your library and your IT organization, as well as for your research work and your provost academic affairs areas. And I say that because there's regular conversations that are going to show the shared needs that libraries can really help with. And I have some more examples of that as we get through my slides. But most of my ideas behind library collaboration with central IT units are really in the areas, or the content and infrastructure trade-offs, in letting libraries do what they do well with content, and letting central IT orgs do what they do well with infrastructure, and real high nine level of support for that infrastructure, whether it's on premises in a kind of a private cloud that's run in a large data center on your university campus, or in a consortia arrangement like the Ohio network that we just heard about, or whether you're already shifted to some kind of a cloud infrastructure as a service, and that's just being managed by your central IT group for all the units on the campus. A good example of this is work I've done on both the Boulder campus as well as the IU campus in enabling ORCID IDs for faculty, researchers, and grad students. That's not just an IT library collaboration. It really runs across research, and it runs across the areas of academic affairs for faculty especially. And it pulls in the best of what central IT can do and the best of what libraries can do, but it has to be a collaboration for that to work well, so that you can get at the enterprise level everyone connected to having an ORCID ID, and then at the same level being able to use that both within faculty reporting systems that might run under the auspices of academic affairs, but then how that plays out with central authentication for central IT, as well as how it would work with any other partnership you might be looking to enable that could be at the school or college level. You may be wanting to assign these to grad students, so that's a different level of partnership. But at least in getting that going, you're going to need the 3-level partnership, and that's going to require real conversations over a period of time to really look at putting those projects together. Now, my next slide is around hybrid IT, and I got to tell you, the Tesla thing has nothing to do with it, but I love this image, and I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. And the reason I wanted to bring this in is because Elon tends to ask the hard questions. What is a car, and how should a car function for its owner? Should it work more like a fractional jet rental where you're actually making money on that all the time, rather than just a very expensive purchased item that sits for most of the day with no income happening on the investment? That's a big question to ask about a particular item like a car, and no one else had asked it before. And he may succeed, he may not succeed with his automated driving cars that make money while the owner's at work. But asking that question is really the key component, and being able to ask it again and again. In fact, most of the time you have to ask a question 3 or 4 times before it gets traction, because the first time you ask it is going to be the whole pushback of, well, we asked about that 15 years ago and nobody wanted to do it. Well, of course they didn't. It was 15 years ago, and the time has changed. The resources have changed. The ease with which you could do it have changed. So continually to ask those questions and to ask them of leadership of those groups that need to be working together that I've already identified. And so that's one of the other key things I'm going to get to today in this talk is asking those harder, higher level, above campus questions, and thinking about that really about from the larger institution, the library, the central IT unit, the university, and the aligned partnerships of the university and the libraries, which often are intermingled a bit. And when I talk about hybrid IT, I'm talking about really best of breed, which, for a long time in enterprise IT, and I'm sure Mark and Theta would readily agree on this, everybody wanted this single system solution from a single vendor, this monolithic thing that, you just had to change all your workflows to get there. The good part now is we've seen a sea change in that because too many places were burned by that, from a business level as well as from a higher ed level. So you've got all of these different tools and services that you can pull together now that you can run yourself in your own data center or in a private cloud or a public cloud. But you have to get that architecture right first, and that kind of discussion has to happen between libraries and IT if you're really going to utilize the resources available to you on your campus. And so in my next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the campus situation, and I think 2 use cases that are instructive around this for me from the campus level or in past roles where I've worked with consultants to augment my IT personnel for specific commodity IT services. I know that this does not go over well with some IT departments. It doesn't go over well with some libraries. But key things to think about in doing that are that for about the price of one person, which is a lot of cash, I know, up front, but about the price of one person and their benefits, you can hire a team of 2 to 3 people who can get a project done for you in a quarter to 6 months, and that can do it, exactly when you need it, and can help you build capacity toward working with whatever that commodity service is. So I've done this previously in Drupal development. Why? Because everybody uses Drupal, although, I think more places are looking at lighter weight content management systems now, but from a Drupal development standpoint, it's real easy to go find the right-sized consultant firm that can do the work for you. This lightens some of the development load for local IT resources, both whether it's in the library or the central part of campus. But it does increase, in some ways, the workload for the product owner, and a lot of times that could be a librarian, that could be another staff member. So those are all trade-offs that you need to think about, when you want to do that. But I do think for specific projects and limited scoped engagements, that type of work can really help libraries get to where they want to be in certain areas, especially when it's easy to buy that expertise from the outside. In my current position at CU Boulder, one of the key projects that IT has been working on here has been outsourcing all the desktop support to our central IT unit on campus. And it's been a really good project so far for us. And what it does is it's really concentrated the central IT unit's expertise on desktop support. And they don't just support, typical desktops. They support the virtual desktops as well as, the regular hardware that you would expect, as well as a lot of components for classrooms that do different things. But by setting that up and combining expertise and combining those into nodes that support that across campus in a timely way, it's really moved that commodity piece of desktop support into one unit for the campus. And that's where people can start to save money versus having to do it all themselves in every different department, college, or school. Now, the flip side of that, and I'm sure someone has a question for me, is, well, I'm sure it's too expensive for some departments. Yes, if you're only supporting 5 desktops, it may be too expensive for what you could do on your own. But then you have to factor into that a lot of other factors around security and some, a lot of other components that could come back to haunt you if you're trying to do that kind of work on your own. So those are just 2 interesting campus examples. And before I leave, too much on the library, and I just wanted to reframe a little bit more of the uniqueness of libraries here. When you look at the infrastructure from central IT units, they're about the infrastructure piece, right? They're more like they're more and more like a utility, like an electric utility, with the kinds of services they run, and that everything's running across their network. Right now, everything pretty much works across that, whether it's the phone system, whether it's the authentication system. The other point I want to make about libraries is looking to our colleagues in the publishing industry a little bit for their game plan as content providers. A lot of our unique materials in libraries are part of our special collections, or we've digitized them and made them available to people online. We need to be thinking about that content and how it plays out in this technical architecture that we're starting to develop, that really takes advantage of the hybrid cloud approach. And as we get more into open access content, OER content, and more recently for libraries data publishing, we have to keep this in mind and figure out how it's going to fit in that architecture, both with the people we need as well as with the technical architecture. And at some point, I see an ecosystem where the content storage components may be continually locally owned or consortially owned for libraries. And the reason I say that is because to really make that content available, we need the kind of cost of bandwidth that we can get from Internet 2 through our central IT organizations that comes to all of our campuses if we want to share that with our researchers, because we can't afford yet commercial bandwidth costs for our content, because a lot of it is really large if it's video based, or it could in aggregate be very large if it's a lot of millions and millions of scanned pictures like some of our collections here at Boulder. So keeping that playbook in mind, and what an MBA, so to speak, in publishing would want to do with content, they're going to look at where they put that content and place it and what those costs are. So we need to be thinking about that as we dive in a little more to my slide here about clouds. And I love this picture because I love the ocean. But what I wanted to bring up about this beautiful picture of the clouds is what's available out there now. And I've got another slide here that will give you a little bit of a inkling of looking at how you can bring these different pieces together. And so mostly what we see in higher ed at this point, unless you're just a smaller institution that never built out data center capacity or anything else like that, you've got some kind of traditional infrastructure, which you see there to your right, and then you're building some kind of hybrid cloud using components from public clouds that might be available to you from state resources or other resources like that, and private clouds that you may have set up either locally in your traditional infrastructure by using virtualization components, or you have some kind of maybe even a consortia private cloud. And you know, I'm going to talk about a few consortia level services that kind of fit the bill like that. But keeping this kind of best of breed model in mind, we need to think about what's coming from the major cloud providers. Now, the one I'll talk a little bit about today is, because I know more about them, is Amazon and the AWS service stack. I've been playing around with it for a long time, looking at, you know, when it could come into play for a publisher-like entity like a library, and how to best take advantage of it, and looking at, you know, what other publishers have done with it and what other content owners have done with it from the corporate sector. So when you take a look at it, and a key thing to know about it is Amazon just had their first in-person, what they call, they call them kind of seminars, or there's another term they use, but it was held last week in Seattle, and it was focused on higher ed. And a lot of the key speakers that were involved in that were from groups that did not have historical investment in traditional infrastructure. And so they had all the reason to move into the Amazon service stack and start using that, whether it's to manage desktops for their people, whether it's to manage the server components that they need for all of their services, like their learning management system, like their library system, like their centralized authentication. All of those are there. The key piece to keep in mind about using any of this is, can you get out of that system? Can you get your content out of that system? If you use that system, does it have, you know, middleware or infrastructure pieces or integration pieces that no one else's cloud infrastructure has? And that's the real debate right now of anybody that's using either the Amazon stack, the Microsoft Azure stack, or the Google stack for this, is if you get too used to the nice pieces that are built in, say from Amazon, then if you know, at the cost, you know, now granted, all of the costs with Amazon, except for bandwidth, generally go down over time. But if those costs become too much to bear, or you just can't afford it anymore and you need to get out, how are you going to move to any of those other cloud infrastructures? And can you, you know, are you reliant too much on the middleware pieces that exist in the Amazon stack? But the interesting part about them having that focused component on higher ed is a place that I see for all, at least libraries, to be looking right now. Is, you know, there's some really nice services coming out from them that will do some wonderful things for your content. And a project I was recently working on was actually looking at trying to index a very large Drupal site, where the Drupal site ran on traditional infrastructure, but they wanted to use the Elasticsearch index in the AWS setup from Amazon. And, you know, it looked like a real winner to me, because you weren't going to have to move content back and forth. You were just going to have to move the content one time, get a continual index, and then do an update to whatever the new content is over time to update that index. The benefit was, it was practically a hosted version of the Elasticsearch indexing at Amazon. You hardly had to do anything with it to have that service going, because it's an ongoing service that Amazon provides for lots of people using their setup. And so that's just but one example. Another one is some of the AI components that Amazon has built in now for indexing video. Not only can they index it in ways that you can search for specific elements of text being spoken or other things like that, but it can actually add that text into the video as part of it. Now, if you had a large video collection and you could push it one time to Amazon, that indexing is the kind of thing that would cost you a whole lot of money some other way. And if you could hybridize that with your regular servers on your traditional infrastructure, so that that's where your users coming to, you're using the Amazon index as needed to pull in different pieces, and then you're pointing them back at your own copy of the content on internet too. That's the kind of hybrid that could be useful for us. So in my last part of my talk, I'm going to talk a little more about what Wheeler and Shelton had talked about as consortial or community kinds of solutions that are above campus. And all of these, regardless of what they are, they're going to affect your collaborations with central IT as well as with other areas of your university, depending on what these community-built open or consortial cloud solutions are. And one that I've worked with quite a bit over the last decade, and it is 10 years old this year, is the HathiTrust. I've worked with HathiTrust, and I've worked with the HathiTrust Research Center in my past positions for the last decade. The great part about HathiTrust is there now is a complete infrastructure there for libraries to put their digital monographs. Now, there are some other areas HathiTrust is working on, and I'm not going to get into those today, but the ironclad piece there really is, okay, so I've digitized the monograph, I want a place to put it, that's the place to put it. Now, what's holding libraries back from that? A lot right now is around the workflows of getting that digitized content into the HathiTrust. Now, there is a pathway, but a lot of those workflows are legacy workflows that are on older systems that don't easily merge to that or align with that, and that's going to be something that libraries are going to have to work on. But if you're looking for that above campus solution for digital monographs, HathiTrust is it. If you have that many, you should be joining it. You shouldn't be keeping three and 4 and 5 copies in other locations. You might keep one copy at home and then put your copy in HathiTrust, which has redundancy built into it. But then you've got, basically an above campus service that's pretty affordable for most places dealing with volume with that kind of stuff. Another interesting solution that I want to bring up today, because I don't think they get enough attention, is the Unison Partnership. Now, this partnership, which I worked with when I was at IU, because they're a member out here, Colorado State is the member that's involved, not the University of Colorado, but it's about 14 schools, and it really runs the gamut in terms of above campus services. They work on a shared technology infrastructure and architecture that they can all use in their own way. They can take a service or they can leave a service depending on what they want to do and what's happening and what's important for their current campus. But a big piece of this is the same kinds of contracting that Mark and Theta had talked about. They're sharing those contracts, and it's not just about the learning management system or the other kinds of services that go along with that, whether it's attendance systems, whether it's video components tied to the learning management system from other kinds of vendors. But it's also covering content, both for the purchase types of course content, as well as looking at whether there can be a consortia there to push an agenda for OER content. And that's why I wanted to bring them up, because I do think that a lot of what they're doing is looking at this model of above campus in new ways and in ways that are outside of the traditional kind of look at this from a university system standpoint. What's important to that is sometimes it's easier to partner with, the large research university in your next state than it is, the brand X and Y that are in a current state. If you have, a large research one and then a land grant and you're always at odds for funding, sometimes it's easier to collaborate with the university in the next state than it is in the one in the same state. But just keeping that in mind, I want to move on to a few more. I wanted to bring up work I've done with Digital Preservation Network. They have a redundant way to preserve data. Once again, like with HathiTrust, the key piece here is in workflows and aligning workflows so that you can take advantage of it. And when you should join it, they're starting to hone their product. They've got a really good piece. A lot of it is built out of, from my cloud diagram, traditional infrastructure housed on 4 and 5 different node sites that are parts of their repository. But rather than building your own or putting investment into for-profit entities, why not consider DeepIn and whether that could fit your workflows for the long term for digital preservation. The next group I'm going to talk about, because I mentioned Deepin, is AP Trust, and this would be a different level, I think. So if you had no infrastructure at all for digital preservation, AP Trust could be your entry point. So in essence, it would be like a consortia that's more of a consultant for getting your digitally preserved content into a system that uses Amazon's cloud to do that with. And overall, this works really great. And as long as you don't have a scale that goes beyond a certain amount, it's a perfect solution for a place that's looking to keep their money in a consortium level environment. So with member university libraries, but also have solutions for digital preservation. So now as I wrap up, and I think I'm going a little long, but nobody's cut me off yet. The key questions that I wanted to kind of turn around for you, and I've adapted some of these from different groups over the years in looking at these higher level questions. But when I asked, does your architecture work for the hybrid cloud or IT model, I'm not only asking about the technical architecture, which you need to work with your central IT group on if you're ever going to have a great user experience that's seamless across your central components and your library edge components, but also about the people part of that. Do you have the right expertise that you need right now, both in your library IT group as well as in your central IT group? How are they working together? How are they taking advantage of the fact that they're either located on the same campus or part of the same system? The other key piece that I think libraries need to think about in particular, and this question comes from Peter Thiel about startups, but libraries tend to be very conservative. So usually they're the last mover when it comes to an IT, strategy or solution. And I'm just saying that because, when you're careful with your content, you don't want to just push it out there into something that's going to be gone tomorrow. So plan to be the last mover. What does that look like in a 5 to 10 year window? And when do you want to be the mover? Do you want to be the very last mover, or do you want to be the mover that does it a couple of years before you really have to do it, right? Before there's no more data center on your campus. And how do you know that? Your regular conversations with your central IT group are going to tell you, what's going on there. Can you get your content out in a cost-effective manner? That's really got to be the key question for any system you get into, but especially if you're a content-driven entity like a library. And do I need my own infrastructure, or can this work in a cloud provider like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, for platform as a service or infrastructure as a service? One of the things I see in libraries right now is this quick adoption of software as a services without enough of a thought as to how that fits for the overall library and central IT architecture for a particular campus. So when you go to look at a software as a service type of offering, and I can come up with a lot of examples of that. A key one is email, because everybody agrees they don't want to run email. They'd rather outsource that to Microsoft or Google or somebody else, usually, unless there's a specific need. When you go to do that, how does that fit with your federated authentication or your single sign-on? How does that fit with what you need to do in other services that are out there if you choose, say, Microsoft's 365 for email? And how is that going to work with your own best interests over time? So if you just keep signing up for software as a service and software as a service and not thinking about how it fits with your kind of at least your local architecture, much less the global architecture of your larger collaborations, then you need to ask yourself that and think about what that architecture is. And is that a good entry point for going to work with your central IT group to say, hey, you have technical architects. Could you have one of them work with us for a bit on aligning our technical architecture with the campuses and with our key partners so that we make sure we have a good idea for the next 5 years how we can manage this over time. So with that, I want to wrap up, and I'll give you my contact info here, but thanks so much for your time today.
All right, thank you so much, Robert. Lots of really great ideas and lots of kind of practical advice. Really appreciate that. One quick question for you, or maybe a quick question, is you had talked about the integration of ORCIDs and the faculty, and what kind of what sort of experience or challenges did you face getting that moving into the faculty and the grad students and working with the IT systems? Was that a challenge, or is that, what kind of barriers did you face in that project?
Sure. And I think there were similar barriers in different directions in both instances that I talked about, both at IU, both at Boulder.
Mhm.
But the key piece there was in looking at IT governance. A lot of times when you're trying to do a new project and you're looking at new resources, you can have the greatest relationship in the world with your central IT group, and you can go to them and say, hey, isn't this a good idea? Shouldn't we do this? And most of the time they're like, yeah, it's a good idea. But from an IT governance model, it really should likely be faculty affairs saying, isn't this a good idea? Shouldn't we be doing this? So if you haven't talked to them already to kind of get their buy-in, then you're going to need to do that at some point. You might as well do that sooner rather than later and take it as a package to the CIO or the IT entity and say, hey, our partnership here on campus thinks this is a good idea. And I think that usually moves the needle a little more than if you just come as the library saying it, because, from an IT governance perspective, when you're looking at information and where it's out there, all information, really pertaining to faculty generally is governed by faculty affairs. There may be some overlap with research, the research office, but having all of them on board saying, this is great, we want to try to put this into our researcher reporting system or whatever your university has, it makes it easier to do that. And then by having IT on up front, that you're bringing your federated authentication to the table the right way, because that I've seen set projects where everything was done, completely done, back 6 months just on the single sign-on, because at first when you did the specs for it, it looked like it would work with what your campus runs. In the interim, they did some changes that you didn't know about to the product because it's a cloud-based product, let's say, and then your authentication doesn't work, and then you're waiting 3 months for a fix. And that's a quick fix if somebody can put it in their product in 3 months for you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I just want to wrap up with you, Robert. I appreciate it